Good morning. This is Ellen Horseman. I'm at First United Methodist Church in Camden, Arkansas, and I welcome you to our Sunday school lesson for the day. I'm going to begin a series that's all based around a book by Scott Sauls. It's called A Gentle Answer. A Gentle Answer. And then his subtitle is Our Secret Weapon in an age of us against them. I'm going to say that again since I kind of tripped over it. Our secret weapon in an age of us against them. So, a gentle answer. And I'll just say that he takes that title from one of the Proverbs that begins, a gentle answer turns away wrath. I think sometimes you'll see that translated soft, but soft or gentle. And so he's looking at how can we have a more gentle response to all the invective and disdain and hatred that we see being scattered all about. I couldn't even come in this morning without hearing hate-filled speech on television news coverage, on the radio, and I was listening to the good radio station. But enough of that. Let me begin. I'm going to begin by reading in the 9th chapter of Luke. In the 9th chapter of Luke, using the Common English Bible, I'm going to begin with verse 46. Listen. An argument arose among the disciples about which of them was the greatest. Aware of their deepest thoughts, Jesus took a little child and had the child stand beside him. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever welcomes this child welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever is least among you Whoever is least among you all will be the greatest. Whoever is least among you will be the greatest." And John replied, "Well, Master, we saw someone throwing demons out in your name, and we tried to stop him because he is not of our group of followers." But Jesus replied, "Don't stop him, because whoever isn't against you is for you." As the time approached when Jesus was to be taken up into heaven, Jesus determined to go to Jerusalem. He sent messengers on ahead of him, and along the way they entered a Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. But the Samaritan villagers refused to welcome Jesus because he was determined to go to Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to consume them?" But Jesus turned and spoke sternly to them, and they went on to another village. Okay, so what's going on in this story? Well, first of all, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And why is he on his way there? He is on his way to the cross. He has, as one of the translations says, turned his face towards Jerusalem, very intentionally going where he knows there will be confrontation and where he knows he most likely will pay with his life for his gentle answer. And so what do we see? He's on his way, and I'm going to back up some. I started to go to the Samaritans, but let me back up. Jesus notices contention, strife among his disciples. Now, these are the people who he has sent. He sent the 12 of them out to proclaim the good news and to heal in his name. These are the people who have seen all the many signs and wonders that Jesus has performed. These are the people who very recently have seen Jesus feed the 5,000. And yet they're quarreling among themselves about who is the greatest. In other words, they're trying to be number one. They're trying to be tough. They're trying to be in charge. They're trying to be the strong guy. And so he puts before them a child, which would have been a little lower than a woman in their society, which was pretty low, and says, you need to become like this, humble and gentle. And do they get it? No, because immediately John starts saying, well, we saw somebody trying to cast out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he's not one of us. So they have gotten into that us against them mentality. If you're not one of us, then you're against us. And if you're against us, then we're against you. And Jesus tells them, no, stop that. So then he starts heading towards Jerusalem, and he's going to go through Samaria. He sends some people ahead of him to a village. Well, why would he do that? In those days, there were no hotels. There were no gas stations. Guess you don't need a gas station if you don't have a car. There were no hotels. There were no eateries along the way. There was no place for a traveler to stay except for the hospitality of strangers. And therefore, hospitality was a very important part of their culture. Hospitality was expected. To be inhospitable was unthinkable. I can't even think of something in our culture that would equate to how terrible it was to be inhospitable. You know, simple things I can think of. We don't expect, if we're standing in a line in a grocery store, for someone to come and elbow us out of the way and push the next person aside and knock over the elderly lady so that they can be the first in line. And that's a very mild comparison to failing to show hospitality. The Samaritans don't want to show hospitality because he's going to Jerusalem and they don't believe that that's a holy city. So it's sort of the us against them mentality. And so what happens when these people are ungracious to Jesus? Well, what happens is James and John say, hey, how about if we use the power of God, the power that we have seen at work in us through the Holy Spirit, how about if we use that power to rain down fire on these people and do them in? In other words, their response to the inhospitality of the Samaritans is outrage. Outrage. Anger. If only there had been social media, they could have tweeted about it. They could have put a post on Facebook. They could have started a hashtag, Samaritans are inhospitable, and gotten people all worked up and angry because, friends, outrage is all the rage right now. It's what we live on. It's what we consume. You can't listen to the news. You can't turn on the radio. You can't open social media of any kind of social media without hearing somebody attacking someone else, accusing someone else, defying someone else, and clustering around in their us against them groups. That is what we have become in this society. And we do it about everything. We wring our hands about it and we talk about political divides and tribalism. Now, we've had political divides before, but we used to be at least civil towards each other, but not anymore. If you don't agree with me, then I need to tweet about you. If you don't agree with me, then I need to be outraged. Makes me think of a story I was reading not too long ago where somebody put up in their own yard a political sign. I don't know if it was for or against a candidate, but they put the sign up in their yard and it disappeared. And they went searching for it and found it in a ditch nearby. So they put it back up again and it happened again. So they put it back up again, this time with a camera. It turned out that the people that were coming into their yard and pulling up this sign, they were not some kind of wild rascals. They were not some kind of vandals or, a lot of times we think of young people as being mischievous and vandalous. No, this was a middle-aged suburban couple. It just so happened that they had a different political point of view. They supported the other political party, and they were outraged that someone had the gall to put up a political sign in that person's own yard, so they thought it was okay for them to take it out. That's the kind of outrage we have right now. We're uncivil to each other. This is something that Scott Sauls talks about in his book. I'm leaning forward here because I want to bring out something that he said. He said that we have entire communities that form around our outrage, our us against them culture. He says even Christians are susceptible to this outrage, not only in our political life, not only in our community life, but even within churches, within denominations, within individual congregations. We began to have this us against them outrage culture. Here's what he says about Christians. The whole idea of being for something has gone out of style. Instead, we prefer to preach an angry gospel about whatever we have decided to stand against. We warm ourselves next to the fire of digital hashtags, ideologically slanted news feeds, political slogans, and religious doctrines. And then, ready, aim, fire. For the more popular voices among us, this can be a great way to build a platform, gain followers and fans, and earn some cash. Outrage sells. For our generation, hate has been commodified. It has been turned into an asset. And that's where we find ourselves in this culture, my friends. Outraged and attacking each other. It does not have to be this way. There is, as the Apostle Paul puts it in Corinthians, a more excellent way. And that more excellent way is the way of love. I want to go back for a minute to James and John and talk about their response, their outrage at the Samaritans, as well as a little earlier when it was John, by the way, who said, that guy wasn't for us, so he's against us. Friends, James and John should have known better. They should have known better by now. After all, these men had spent nearly 3 years in the company of Jesus, nearly 3 years following him, listening to him, hearing him preach. At the very beginning of this chapter 9 in Luke, you will see that Jesus commissions these 2 men, along with the 10 others, to go out and proclaim the good news and heal people. And they go and they'll come back excited about how they have seen God working in the lives of people. In this same chapter, James and John will go up along with Peter onto a mountaintop and see Jesus transfigured into all his heavenly glory. What an amazing, amazing experience that must have been. How awed they must have been by the glory of God that was still loving and humble. In this same chapter, these 2 men have seen Jesus feed the 5,000. So they've seen a lot, they've witnessed a lot, they've heard Jesus preach, they've heard Jesus say things like, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who harass you. Pray for those who persecute you." Jesus has talked the way of love. He has shown the way of love. He has shown the gentle answer to people's outrageous behavior. But James and John, they just throw that all aside and want to call down outrage and fire upon someone else. Shouldn't they have known better? And shouldn't we know better? Because we're even on the other side of the cross. We know what Jesus has done for us. And so, my friends, I call us to live the more excellent way, which is the way of love, which is the way of the gentle answer. Listen to what I'm saying. I feel like in this culture of ours where there's so much divisiveness, where our first instinct is to attack, where the first negative thought that comes to our mind, we can't wait, I guess I'm on my phone here, we can't wait to get that phone out and start tweeting our response or posting our response on Facebook instead of taking time to maybe think about what we're going to say first. There is a more gentle way. There is a more loving way. And that is the gentle answer. I think I think in this culture, if I said, "Oh, let's try gentleness," there's a part of us that would laugh at the idea. Because we think that gentleness is weakness. But hear this, friends, gentleness is not weakness, it is strength. Loving is not weakness, it is courage. A gentle answer does not take weakness or weakness of will. It takes strength and endurance and the power of God to make it happen. Our example is Jesus, who was definitely the man of the gentle answer. Jesus and his gentle answer. And what was his gentle answer to the outrage around him? What was his gentle answer people that wanted to have an us against them mentality, that wanted to put him in his place, that wanted to control politically and materially. His answer was the cross. His answer was to show us through complete self-emptying, complete humility, complete love, that God loves us and that we can love one another. So gentleness doesn't mean that we have to be weak. And gentleness does not mean that we don't do what is right. Gentleness does not mean that we don't take up a moral cause. Sometimes taking up that moral cause is called righteous indignation or righteous anger. And that's true, that we should be on the side of righteousness. I kind of hate to use the term righteous anger, though, because I think we're too easy to go to the anger part of it and forget about the righteous part of it. But there are times when we will see an injustice, and it is our obligation to do something about that injustice. That's not weakness, but it can be done with gentleness, and as a matter of fact, it's more effective when it's done with gentleness. Righteous indignation, anger or energy directed at helping where other people are being treated unjustly has been what has propelled our culture and made us better and better and better. That kind of righteous indignation is what caused people to turn against the slave trade, is what caused people to turn towards civil rights, is what caused people to I'm losing my train of thought. Can you say it? It caused people to fight for equality for women and minorities. So that's okay. But it's the technique that we use that should make a difference. Unfortunately, right now, our culture is absorbed with the idea of attacking each other. Scott Sauls quotes a man named Dr. John Perkins. Now, Dr. John Perkins is a 89-year-old pastor, evangelist, and civil rights activist. Perkins was born, to remind you, he's 89 years old, so it was a long time ago. He was born a black man in the Jim Crow South. He was born a sharecropper's son. His family was so poor that his mother died from malnutrition while she was trying to nurse him as an infant. His father abandoned him in the care of his grandmother, a sharecropper's wife who had already raised like 11 or 12 kids of her own and had no money. So he grew up in poverty. He grew up being beaten because of the color of his skin. And when he was a young man, his older brother came back from World War II. His older brother, a veteran of World War II, was sitting in the movie theater with Perkins, and a police officer came in and for no apparent reason came behind Perkins' brother, John Perkins' brother, and just took his club and smacked the man in the back of the head. Well, this veteran didn't know what was going on, but somebody had attacked him. So, of course, he jumped up and turned around to face whoever it was that had just smacked him. This was a police officer, but he hadn't identified himself as a police officer. This was a police officer, but John's brother had not committed any offense. He was just sitting there watching a movie. But when he turned towards the person who had hit him, the officer pulled out his gun and shot him dead. And John Perkins, a young man, watched his brother die. Uncivilly, unfairly. And of course, no justice for that. Not in the Jim Crow South. He could have grown up, John Perkins could have, as a very bitter man. But he was a church man. He was a man whose grandmother who had carried him to church. He was a man who caught fire for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so he decided that the best way to approach this kind of hatred was with a gentle answer. Answering insult and injury and attacks with love. But Dr. Perkins, and I hope he's not getting too discouraged. I bet he isn't, because he's worked for a long time. But Scott Sauls quotes him as saying, "This generation is the first to turn hate into an asset." This generation is the first to turn hate into an asset. My friends, it does not have to be that way. There is a more gentle answer. There is a more courageous answer towards answering insult and hatred and attacks upon us. And it is the way of the cross. I mean, why do we attack people? Why do we get insulted? Why do we jump to judgmentalism, which is what I see John and his brother doing here? We judge other people. We decide other people are not part of us. We decide other people are wrong. And I think it's because of fear. Now, we may not admit that to ourselves, but when we are afraid, then we need something to help us feel like we have control. And so our default setting is to be judgmental of other people. Our default setting is to attack other people. How does Jesus respond when James and John do that? He rebukes them. I believe that this translation I read said he spoke sternly to them. So the gentle answer of love doesn't mean that we don't take up the cause of justice. But what it means is that we make that taking up the cause of justice the way of the cross. Think about that. As Jesus speaks that stern answer to them, as Jesus admonishes them and pulls them back, he's doing that because he loves them. And he wants them to understand that the way to respond is to respond in love. You see, when we respond with hatred, when we say, well, I don't blame you, girl, for being mad, when we respond and attack other people, when we become a hater, we don't just injure the person that we're verbally attacking. We don't just injure the person that we're putting down or slamming or making a hashtag about. We don't just injure that person. We injure ourselves. Because we can never be at peace with ourselves when we are defaulting to hating and judgment and outrage. It eats our soul. There is a more excellent way, as Paul describes it, and it is the way of love. It is the way of the cross. This week we listened to lots of stories about John Lewis, another man who grew up in the Jim Crow South, another man who saw injustice in his day, a man who took up the righteous cause of civil rights, of freedom, of the right for people to vote. When he was a young man, he was like 18 years old, he would get on buses with the Freedom Riders to ride to Washington, D.C. because a court had said that you couldn't keep black people from riding on the buses. And he and his fellow sojourners were beaten. He had his skull cracked. He was unconscious a few times. He was thrown in jail. And he wasn't done getting hit in the head. He also would be beaten unconscious as he crossed the bridge in Selma, Alabama, to fight for the right for people to be able to vote. And yet all his life, this man who lived for 80 years believed in what he had heard from Dr. Martin Luther King, that the way to change is nonviolent, that the way to change is to love. And all his life he called for us to love each other, to be brothers and sisters to each other. I heard one of the reporters that had been around Lewis talking about how Lewis was always so humble and so kind. He said that when he was in, as a reporter, when he was in the Capitol, he would see a lot of people go hurrying by. Congressmen, their aides, senators, their aides, and often people would act like they were too important to take time, not just to talk to a reporter, but anyone else. But this man said that John Lewis, if you called out to him, or even if you didn't, if he saw you standing there, he would stop and talk if you wanted to talk. And he would stop and talk with visitors who had come to the Capitol building. And if they wanted to take his picture, he was very patient with them. He'd take a picture with them. He treated everybody as if that person was very, very special to him. And so we celebrate this great icon. But what I really love about this man, who believed in the gentle answer, is that he, as he knew he was approaching death, he wrote an editorial, and he asked the New York Times to publish it on the day of his funeral. So this was published yesterday, and I want to read just the very ending of it, because it certainly gets us to the way of the cross, the gentle love of Jesus, who would show us with his own body that God loves us, that the way to relate to other people is not with hatred, is not with outrage, but with self-sacrificing love. And so let John Lewis speak to this. The last two paragraphs of what he writes are this: though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart. Stand up for what you truly believe in. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and non-violence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burden of hate. And at last, that peace finally triumphed over violence, over violence and aggression and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of the everlasting love be your guide. Friends, we do not have to turn in hate. We can turn in love. We can follow the way of Jesus, who gave everything he had. And because Jesus loved us, because Jesus forgave us of the very worst that we could ever be, we can forgive others, even when they are cruel to us. Let love be your gentle answer. Amen.